Morning, all. Evidently, we have folks traveling this weekend. I know Lance and Jennifer are off. I don't know where all they are. North Carolina. So we wish them well, of course. We'll have a prayer time at the end. Today, we're going to look at the rest of the flood. Then next week, we're going to take a look at the first covenant, the Table of Nations, and the Tower of Babel. So we're going to squeeze a lot into next week. And then after that, I want to show you a video having to do with Genesis and its historical value. So that's what's on tap for the next few weeks. So let's look at Genesis, the 7th chapter, starting at the 17th verse. Now last week we saw about how Noah built the ark, took 120 years to build it. They got in the ark, God locked them in. God shut the door. It was left open for 7 days before it started to rain, and yet God allowed it to remain open, hoping, I think, number one, that other people would see the value of getting in the ark, or testing Noah and his family to make sure they were committed to staying in the ark. Of course, after you've worked 120 years to build a boat, you want to ride on it, don't you? I mean, come on. So then the Lord shut them in. Then for 40 days, the flood kept coming. So let's read it. It says, for 40 days, the flood kept coming on the earth. And as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. Verse 20, the waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 15 cubits, or 23 feet or so. The point wasn't so much how much distance there was over the mountains. The fact was that the mountains were covered. Now, I contend that mountains then weren't as high as they became, but we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks when we start looking at is Genesis history. So I want you to notice several things in this passage. First of all, the 40 days. We're going to talk about 40 in a minute. But we see the waters increased greatly. The flood kept coming. It was incessant. You know, back during Hurricane Dolly, Nina and I stayed on the island and rode it out in our condo because it was only supposed to be a Category 1. Well, it turns out it was a Category 2. And it stayed there all day long. So it was a little nerve-wracking, and I kept watching the water level in our, we live in a marina. I kept watching the water level, hoping against hope that we weren't going to have a tidal surge and have it come in our first floor. And so, it kept coming. But that was only for a few hours. Can you imagine the floodwaters? This says kept coming for 40 days. 40 days is a long time, isn't it? I mean, the rain is pounding you. It says the waters of the deep, the fountains of the deep sprung open. So there was a lot of turmoil going on. But I notice it says the waters increased, and then in verse 18, the waters rose and increased greatly. Then in verse 19, they rose greatly on the earth. In verse 20, the waters rose and covered. I mean, the writer here is trying to impact or give us what the impact was of these floodwaters. This wasn't just an overflow of a river. I mean, this was incredible. Nothing like this had ever happened again before. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't have my Bible open, but did it rain 40 days?
Yes.
Or did the water just keep coming up for 40 days?
Both. It rained for 40 days, and the springs of the great deep continued to pump water upwards. And we're going to talk about that in a second. But I want you to notice 40. 40 is one of God's favorite numbers. I looked in my Strong's exhaustive concordance, and I couldn't count how many times 40 is mentioned in the Bible. And I just picked a few out, almost all of which are from the Old Testament. In Genesis, remember when the angel came to Abraham about what God was going to do to Sodom and Gomorrah. He says, if I find there 40 righteous men, I will spare the city. And then later on in Genesis, we find out that Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah. In Genesis 50, the 3rd verse, it says, taking a full 40 days, for that was the time required for embalming. That was at the death of Jacob. 40 days. And then in Exodus 16:35, it says, the Israelites ate manna 40 years in the wilderness. In Numbers 13:25, at the end of 40 days, they, that's the spies, returned from exploring the land. And then in Numbers 14:34, God says, for 40 years, 1 year for every day you explore the land, you will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you. And then finally over in Luke, we find Jesus was led out into the wilderness where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. So we find this recurring number, 40. What other recurring numbers do we find in the Bible? 7, 3. I mean, there's some important numbers, right? And I think we need to take note. That wasn't by accident. So let's get back to the flood. This was the total annihilation of all living things under the heavens. Look at verse 23 what it says. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out. People and animals and the creatures that move along the ground and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left and those with him in the ark. Everything wiped out. Then in Genesis 7:24 says the waters flooded the earth for 150 days. 150 days. Now it's unclear as to whether that's in addition to the first 40 days or does that count the first 40 days. I don't know. But it was a long time. Which 40 days, 150 days is what? 5 months, right? If you're 30-day months. 5 months. The flood waters covered the earth. The rain had stopped, but the deep, that is the seas, continued to be violent. There were great tidal waves, and the water was constantly moving, sloshing, as it were, from one side of the earth to the other. And water has power. Water is tremendously powerful. Canyons were carved, and mountain ranges were thrust up by the unprecedented earthquake and volcanic activity. This, as I say later, this was, I'll get to that in a minute. So, what caused this to happen? I mean, God caused the earthquakes. Now, I have a theory, I have an opinion, and that's all it is, okay? My opinion is that when the earth was first made habitable, when God remade the earth in Genesis 1:2, the earth was perpendicular to the sun. It wasn't on an angle like it is now, right? Now, because I think, the reason I think that is because it did not have seasons. It was the temperature was very moderate, was constant. It was a different order of things. But then when God decided to flood the earth, I think all he did was with his finger or maybe a meteorite or something like that, he went boink, and the earth swiveled. I mean, it got off of its axis, right? So now it swivels like a top. And what do we have? We have seasons, don't we? Cold and warm, right? And that's my opinion. But if that happened, if a huge meteorite hit the earth at God's instruction, and the earth all of a sudden goes from like this to like this, what's going to happen to the water? I mean, it's going to rush from side to side and end to end. It's going to be massive. The scientists have suggested that the ark, from the place that Noah built it, moved maybe 500 miles before it came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. I mean, that's a long way to just float around, isn't it? So the waters were moving. It was a cataclysmic event. And then I love this. In chapter 8, verse 1, it says, "But God remembered Noah." Here he's wiped out the entire earth, but God is still aware of Noah. I think it's one of the most beautiful statements in the Torah. God remembered his chosen person. How can he forget? You know, I mean, Moses and his family, they were the only folks around. I mean, how would you forget that? Well, I don't think that God actually had to remember Noah. I think the meaning is more like God took notice of Noah. And he acted. Now, this says Genesis 7:1. That's a typo. It's actually 8:1. And he says in the back part of verse 1, he says, "And he sent a wind over the earth, and the waters receded." Now, this is after 150 days, right? It says, not only was the rain, the deluge, the flood unprecedented, so were the changes in atmospheric conditions. Undoubtedly, drastic temperature change occurred, resulting in high and low barometric pressures, changes in air pressure. And if you know anything about meteorology, you know that the difference between high pressure and low pressure creates what? Wind. It's like, as far as the atmosphere is concerned, it's like, you know, here's the high end of the pool and here's the shallow end of the pool, and the water wants to go this way, towards this, or that way, whatever. It wants to move, right? And it's the same way with the air. So we have differences in barometric pressures. We have wind. I don't think the wind had ever blown before, or at least not significantly, not to the extent that it blew in this instance. And the receding of the water wasn't like a gentle, gradual draining of the tub. It didn't happen that way. It couldn't have, right? With the uplifting of the mountains and the volcanic activity, the shifting of massive pieces of earth was racing along, separating land masses from each other, spreading the remains of the dead throughout the earth. And we're going to talk about that when we look at this video. Because on every continent of the earth, you know what we find? Fossilized sea life. Fossilized sea life, right? So you know, you get the picture, don't you? I always did, of Noah and the ark bobbing along on top of the lake, you know, kind of like Gulf of Mexico, just kind of bobbing along. I don't think it looked like that at all. I think it was rough. I think it was scary. I think it was very violent, in my opinion. But that's the way it appears to me. And then finally, on the 17th day of the 7th month, they've been out there 5 months, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month. And on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. So here's what happened. The rain had stopped and the water had begun to recede, but Noah wasn't out of the woods yet. The ark came to rest on a mountain, but the tops of the mountains weren't visible yet, so Noah was stuck and aground for a long time. Now, any of you who boat, Chris hasn't been boating since yesterday. One of the things that sailors fear is running aground. And nowadays we have all sorts of sophisticated depth instruments that can tell you how much water you have under the keel. That's a valuable tool. But some boats don't have that. And even with that, sometimes they run aground. We had a tanker or something run aground in the channel here not too long ago. And that's a big deal. You fear running aground because then you're at the mercy of the water. You know, you see, it doesn't happen very often now, but when I was a kid, it was not uncommon for shrimp boats to run aground just right offshore, right? So, offshore of the island. And if they couldn't get the shrimp boat off the sandbar, what happened to the shrimp boat? It got pounded to smithereens, right? Water is powerful. It's a fearful thing. And so here they are, aground on the top of a mountain. for a long time. And I can imagine Noah's thinking, what next? I mean, look what I've gone through. And of course, you know about the raven and the dove. He sent out a raven to see what it would bring back, and it didn't find anything. Then he sent a dove out to see if the water had receded from the surface of the ground, but the dove could find no place to set its feet. So it returned to Noah. He reached out his hand, took the dove, and brought it back to himself in the ark. He waited 7 more days and again sent out the dove. When the dove returned in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that there was dry land somewhere. But I want you to notice how many times it says Noah waited. He waited 7 more days, sent the dove out again, but this time it did not return to him. Noah waited a lot. He worked for 120 years to build the ark. God told him to come into the ark. He waited 7 days for something to happen. Then God closed the hatch, so to speak. The floodwaters came. He waited on the ark for a long time before there was even any optimistic reason that it was over. 40 days. I mean, that's a long time, right? And so Noah was patient. Noah was patient. If you notice in verse 6 of chapter 8, it says, after 40 days, there's that 40 again, after 40 days, Noah opened the window he had made in the ark. 40 days he waited. This is after the wind started to blow and the water started to recede. 40 days into that, he opened the window. So we find Noah to be a very patient man, very patient. It's one of his wonderful characteristics. Finally, the time has come. Finally, the time is here for Noah and his family to leave the ark. God says, this is in the 27th day of the 2nd month, the earth was completely dry. Then God said to Noah, come out. Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and your wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number. I think God was excited to be able to tell Noah to do this. We're going to find in a few minutes, God felt very badly about having to destroy the earth. So much so that he promised never to do it again. Interesting. So here they come, trooping down out of the ark. And the first thing Noah did, in verse 20, it says, Noah built an altar. Noah built an altar. This was part of his worship and his thanks. He offered sacrifices, 2 of the clean animals and some birds, and God was pleased. You know, it doesn't say that God told him to do this, does it? We don't find it mentioned here at all. He spontaneously did it. He just knew in his heart the right thing to do. And undoubtedly, he was familiar with the Cain and Abel story. I'm sure he knew that story well. In fact, he probably heard it from Seth, because I think their lifespans overlapped. So he knew instinctively what to do, and it pleased God. That's the most important part. It pleased God. He knew he had picked the right man. And in Genesis 8, 21 through 22, we find God's threefold promise. There's the 3. He says, the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, never again will I curse the ground because of humans. Even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. he feels bad about it. He hated to do it. He really did. And then he goes on to say, as long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. So we have three promises here. We have, never again will he curse the ground because of man with a flood. We're going to find it later. Number one. Number two, never again is he going to destroy all living creatures. And then, maybe the most important part is, he says there's a new natural order of things. And we can count on it. Now, that's important because God knows that after this flood, men are going to think the flood's coming again. What did we all think right after 9/11? In the days following 9/11, what did we think was going to happen?
Another terrorist.
Another attack. This was just the first of a series. Nina and I went to New York in November after 9/11, and the security was just amazing. It's still pretty tight in New York. Why? They think it might happen again. And God knew in man's heart that is what he was going to think about the flood. As a matter of fact, I'm getting a little ahead of the story, but as a matter of fact, that's what the people that built the Tower of Babel thought, that it was going to flood again. So God needed to reassure man that he needn't worry about that. There are other things he needs to worry about. But don't worry about the flood, because now there's a new natural order of things. The way things are now, post-flood, are going to remain until the end. Right? There aren't going to be any more changes. That's why I have the idea that there weren't any seasons before. There wasn't heat and cold. It was a static system until the flood. But God said, this is it. This is the way it is, and that's the way it's going to stay. Now, I think I mentioned last week that there are other traditions. All ancient civilizations have a flood tradition. I'm going to mention a few of them to you. The most detailed is the Babylonian tradition. And in the archives of the Temple of Marduk in Babylon, is related by Berosus, who was a historian, contained this story. Xisuthros, a king, was warned by one of the gods to build a ship and take into it his friends and relatives and all different kinds of animals with all necessary food. Whereupon he built an immense ship which was stranded in Armenia. Upon subsistence of the flood, he sent out birds. The third time they returned not. He came out and builded an altar and sacrificed. This is found in Babylonian archives, right? The Egyptians had a legend that the gods at one time purified the earth by a great flood from which only a few shepherds escaped. The Greek tradition, Deucalion, warned that the gods were going to bring a flood upon the earth for its great wickedness, built an ark which rested on Mount Parnassus. A dove was sent out twice. Hindu tradition, Manu, warned, built a ship in which he alone escaped from the deluge, which destroyed all creatures. And then you have a Chinese tradition and an English tradition. Polynesians, Mexicans, Peruvians, American Indians had various legends in which 1, 3, or 8 persons were saved in a boat above the waters on a high mountain. So we have this throughout ancient civilizations. They have a flood tradition. It's usually most of these, of course, became like myths, right? There had to be an accurate historical event that started the process. So, that's kind of amazing. And there's one other guy that talks about the flood that I want to share with you. This is the historian Josephus, Flavius Josephus, who was writing in the 1st century A.D. And he had access, if you read through his book, I don't think you could get through it, in an afternoon. It's a little long. But if you read through his book, you find that he refers to other documents. He footnotes his work. as a matter of fact. I mean, he gives credit to, as such and such historian said, or is this not written in the annals of the kings of Judah, which a document we don't have anymore? I mean, he had access to reference material that we don't. But here's what he had to say about Noah and the flood. He said, "Now Lamech, when he had governed 777 years, appointed Noah, his son, to be ruler of the people, who was born to Lamech when he was 182 years old, and retained the government 950 years." So he's talking about Noah was not only a righteous man, he was a king or a leader. Okay, according to Josephus. And he goes on to talk about the floodwaters and so forth, and how the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. He talks about the birds and the olive branch and all that. Now here's the interesting part. He says, however, talking about the place where the ark came to rest. However, the Armenians call this place the place of descent. For the ark being saved in that place, it remains shown there by the inhabitants to this day. That's first century. They knew where the ark was. Now, all the writers of barbarian histories, of course, Jews think that everybody else is barbarian. He says the writers of barbarian histories make mention of this flood and of this ark. Among them is Berosus, the Chaldean, which I just mentioned a minute ago. For when he is describing the circumstances of the flood, he goes on like this. It is said there is still some part of this ship in Armenia, at the mountain of the Cordinians, and that some people carry off pieces of the bitumen, which they take away and use chiefly as amulets for averting of mischiefs. They take pieces of bitumen. What's bitumen? It's oil. It's tar. Remember pitch? He had to coat the outside of the boat and inside the pitch to make it watertight. Evidently, people were going to the ark and bringing back pieces of that tar, right? To be used as supposedly to ward off evil. I mean, I discovered this one passage a long time ago, but it amazed me when I did. I mean, it was a tourist attraction.
But they hold it as sacred, something sacred.
Yeah, something. Yeah.
Obviously, if they're using the pieces of it to.
And ever so often somebody says they found the ark, and Nina has a saying. She said, "Well, if they really find the ark, it'll be on Fox News, so I'll just wait. Won't get excited till that happens." But there have been sightings of the ark, or things, in a glacier and all that. But I found that interesting, that people would go there and take pieces off of it. All right, we'll stop there. Next week we'll pick up with the covenant, God's covenant with Noah, the table of nations, that is the descendants of Noah, and the Tower of Babel. Interesting story. Okay, prayer time. Say, pray for our preacher and his family while we're traveling.
Christine's been following the post by Cami, and Paul's been given an evaluation to possibly go home tomorrow.
Right, yeah. He is, I think the latest, Nina was reading it to me in the car coming in. They changed his medication, and that seemed to help with his blood pressure spiking issue. Yeah. This afternoon, I think, she was going to bring his dog, and walk around the complex with the dog. They want to make sure he can do it there before he tries to do it at home. Right. But he seems to be making progress. Some cases remarkable progress. It's been 17 days,
Yeah.
So be sure and keep him in your prayers. Eloisa, any news?
We visited her Monday and she was quite unhappy. She was moved to a small